Thank you, Chairman Corker, Ranking Member Menendez, members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today to talk about the situation in Ukraine and for the personal investment that so many of you have made in that country's future. Today, Ukraine is central to our 25-year transatlantic quest for a Europe whole, free, and at peace. My interagency colleagues and I are pleased to update you on U.S. efforts to support Ukraine as it works to liberate the country from its corrupt oligarchic past and chart a more democratic European future, and to bring an end to the Russian and separatist aggression. In my remarks, I'll focus on two areas today. First, the work that Ukraine is doing with U.S. and international support to reform the country, to tackle corruption, and to strengthen democratic institutions. Second, I'll give an update on our efforts to support the implementation of the February and September Minsk agreements, including our readiness to impose further costs on Russia if the commitments Moscow made are further violated. Ukraine's leaders in the executive branch and the parliament know that they are in a race against time and external pressure to clean up the country and enact the difficult and socially painful reforms required to kickstart the economy and to meet their commitments to their own people, to the IMF, and to the international community. The package of reforms already put forward by the government and enacted by the Rada is impressive in its scope and in its political courage. Just last week, the Ukrainians passed budget reform, which is expected to slash the deficit significantly this year and to give more fiscal control to local communities and spur economic and political decentralization. They've made tough choices in just the last few days to reduce and cap pension benefits and to phase in a higher retirement age as requested by the IMF. They've created new banking provisions to stiffen penalties for stripping assets from the banks at the public's expense, a common practice among oligarchs. And they've passed laws cutting wasteful gas subsidies and closing the space for corrupt middlemen who buy low, sell high, and rip off the Ukrainian people. Ukraine will use the $400 million in increased revenue from these measures to care for the 1.7 million people who've been driven from their homes by the conflict. With U.S. support, with your support on this committee and in this Congress, including a $1 billion loan guarantee last year and $355 million in foreign assistance and technical advisors, the Ukrainian government is improving energy efficiency in homes and factories with metering, consumer incentives, and infrastructure improvements, building e-governance platforms to make procurement more transparent and basic government services cleaner and more publicly accessible. They're putting a newly trained force of beat cops on the streets in Kiev who will protect, not shake down the citizens, a prototype of what they hope to do nationwide. They're reforming the Prosecutor General's office, supported by U.S. law enforcement and criminal justice advisors, to help energize law enforcement and increase prosecutions. With the help of USAID experts, they're deregulating the agriculture sector and allowing family farmers to sell more of their produce in local and regional and wholesale markets. And they're helping those who are forced to flee Donetsk and Luhansk with new jobs and skills training in places like Kharkiv. And there's more support on the way. The President's FY16 budget request includes $513.5 million to build on these efforts. And as you said, Mr. Ranking Member and Mr. Chairman, Ukraine's hard work must continue. Between now and the summer, we must see continued budget discipline and tax collection enforced across the country, notably including on some of Ukraine's richest citizens who have enjoyed tax impunity for far too long. We need to see continued reforms at Naftogaz and across the energy sector. We need to see final passage of agricultural legislation, full and impartial implementation of anti-corruption measures, including a commitment to break the oligarchic, kleptocratic culture that has ripped off the country for too long. As you both said in your opening statements, the best antidote to Russian aggression and malign influence is for Ukraine to succeed as a democratic free market state. For this to happen, we have to help ensure that the Ukrainian government lives up to its promises to its own people and keeps the trust of the international financial community. But at the same time, the United States and Europe and the international community must keep faith with Ukraine and help ensure that Russia's aggression and meddling can't crash Ukraine's spirit, its will, or its economy before reforms take hold. That brings me to my second point. Even as Ukraine is building a more peaceful, democratic, independent nation across 93% of its territory, Crimea and parts of Ukraine, of eastern Ukraine, have suffered a reign of terror. In eastern Ukraine, Russia and its separatist puppets have unleashed unspeakable violence and pillage. This is a manufactured conflict controlled by the Kremlin, fueled by Russian tanks and heavy weapons, and financed at Russian taxpayers' expense. It's cost the lives of more than 6,000 Ukrainians, and hundreds of young Russians have also lost their lives in eastern Ukraine, sent there to fight and die by the Kremlin. And when they come home in zinc coffins, cargo 200, which is the Russian euphemism for war dead, their mothers and their wives and their children are told not to ask too many questions or raise a fuss if they ever want to see death benefits. Throughout this conflict, the United States and the EU have worked in lockstep to impose successive rounds of tough sanctions, including sectoral sanctions on Russia and its separatist cronies as the costs for their actions. Our unity with Europe remains the cornerstone of our policy towards this crisis and a fundamental source of our strength. It's in that spirit that we salute the efforts of German Chancellor Merkel and French President Hollande in Minsk on February 12th to try again to end the fighting in eastern Ukraine. The Minsk package of agreements, the September 5th and 19th agreements, and the February 12th implementing agreement offer a real opportunity for peace, disarmament, political normalization and decentralization in Ukraine, and the return of Ukrainian state sovereignty in the east and border control. For some eastern Ukrainians, conditions have already begun to improve. The OSCE reports that the ceasefire is holding on many parts of the line of contact. There have been significant withdrawals already of Government of Ukraine heavy weapons, and some separatist heavy weapons have also been withdrawn, although that process is incomplete, as is OSCE access. And in the little village in southeast Donetsk of Kominternova, demining has already begun under OSCE auspices. But the picture is very mixed. Just yesterday, shelling continued in Shirokina, a key village on the way to Mariupol, and outside Donetsk over the weekend. As I said, access for OSCE monitors, particularly in separatist-controlled areas, remains spotty. And just in the last few days, we can confirm new transfers of Russian tanks, armored vehicles, heavy artillery, and rocket equipment over the border to the separatists in eastern Ukraine. So in the coming days, not weeks, here's what we need to see. A complete ceasefire in all parts of eastern Ukraine, full, unfettered access to the whole conflict zone, a pullback of all heavy weapons, and an end to uninspected convoys of cargo over the Ukrainian border. If fully implemented, this will bring greater peace and security in eastern Ukraine for the first time in almost a year. As the President has said, we will judge Russia by its actions, not by its words. And the United States will, with our international partners, start rolling back sanctions on Russia, but only when the Minsk agreements are fully implemented. The reverse is also true. If these are not implemented, there will be more sanctions, and we have already begun consultations with our European partners on further sanctions pressure should Russia continue fueling the fire in the east or in other parts of Ukraine, fail to implement Minsk, or grab more land, as we saw in Debaltseve after the agreements were signed. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of this committee, America's investment in Ukraine is about far more than protecting the choice of a single European country. It's about protecting the rules-based system across Europe and globally. It's about saying no to borders changed by force, to big countries intimidating their neighbors or demanding a sphere of influence. We thank this committee for its bipartisan support and commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and to a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Thank you.